Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to be looking at Julius Caesars. This is another game from Columbia Games, and it uses their Columbia game engine, as I like to call it. And so what we want to do today is just kind of take a look at some of the components, go over some rules, and basically I just want to kind of share with you why I think this is a really good game. Recently, I also was learning and playing Richard III, which is another one of their games, and it's very similar. There's a lot of similar aspects to the two. So if a person's looking into getting into some of these block games, what's nice is as you learn one set of rules, then you already have a little bit of familiarity with say another game in the system. Now this is different, so it's not like the same game where they just slap a different theme on. There are actually some different gameplay completely, and so that's why I want to talk to you about that today. So I think you'll enjoy this, and so let's kind of go over what the game is. So this is Julius Caesar. So it brings, I'm going to read the introduction paragraph. It brings the drama of the most famous and significant Roman civil war, which happened from 49 to 45 BC, to life. Players take control of the legions of Caesar or Pompey and fight to determine the future of Rome, republic or empire. Now, you've got here the two color blocks you can see. So the brownish, reddish blocks, those are Caesar's blocks, and the green are Pompey's blocks. And essentially, to get victory, what you're doing then with those two forces is you're going to play the game for 5 years. And then each year is divided into 5 game turns. So after each year ends, there's also a winter turn. Now, that's when you'll check for victories during the winter turn. And so to determine victory, what you want to do is check the value of friendly cities. So every city here, well, there's not every city, but there's a few cities that have these point values. So they're either 2 points. Rome is 2, and I think the rest are 1 point. But if you have blocks in the city, then that counts as a friendly city. So you get a victory point for that, and then you get a victory point for each leader killed. So to win, you got to have 10 or more victory points. Now it says if you go all the way through the end of the game and neither player has reached those 10 victory points, then you can say it's the player with the higher amount of victory points. If it's still tied, then the game is won by the player holding Rome. So Rome is central to this. And then otherwise, if nobody holds Rome and everybody has an equal amount of points, then it's a draw. So one of the first things you kind of have to decide, and it changes as you play. Obviously, you're trying to get cities, but it's like, do you spend a lot of time and effort holding Rome now? Do you try to get Rome later? Because 2 points and possibly to be the tiebreaker is pretty important. So a lot of times your initial strategies might be around that. Caesar, I think, has a better advantage in that department because he's got more units here on the mainland. And I'm just going to take the camera lifted up, just kind of show you the layout. I've actually set this up to be the beginning of the game. So Pompey's forces are actually kind of spread out a little bit. And he's on like the southern part of the map. They're spread out. And then Julius Caesar, his troops are all kind of centrally located. So he, I think, has a pretty good advantage starting out, especially, like I said, if you want to move and hold Rome or this central portion of the map. Now, that's one of the big differences then that's going to be between, say, Julius Caesar and Richard III, is with Julius Caesar, there's this added element that you have to take into consideration Navy movement. And so, for example, because you've got, I'm just trying to move this camera down here. I've got some troops down here for Pompey, and in order for him to bring some of that up, he could do some island hopping, but he's going to need his navies to do that. And so a lot of the navies start out in port, and you have to move them out into the sea area you want to cross. But we'll talk about movement later. But to me, that's one reason why I like this game, is there's just this added element of how do you maneuver your troops around. There's a lot of water. All right, so that's the victory condition. That's what we're looking for in this particular game. So what we'll do now is kind of go over some of the game turns, take a look at some of the cards and what they represent, and maybe show some combat, and just give you a feel for how the game works. All right, so let's get ready to talk about the card phase. Alright, I moved the camera down here to this empty part of the map so we can take a look at the cards. So the cards come in 27 cards. You have 20 command cards, which are those, and then you have 7 event cards. So we'll do just real quickly take a look at the anatomy of a card, and then we'll explain what we do with that during the card phase. So let's take a look at a command card first. So a command card has several parts to it. First of all, this part represents the movement, essentially like movement points, how many units or cities it can activate for movement. And then you have down here the levee points, and that's essentially how many points it can spend on recruiting or replenishing damaged units. And then over here you have an event card. Now the event card, the 7 of them, they're represented by, they're named after the Roman gods. They will give you an event, a special thing. Like for example, here I grabbed Jupiter. So it says King of the Gods causes 1 defection. So I would choose 1 enemy block adjacent to a friendly city, turn it around and move it to that friendly city. So this block moves and fights for you, but returns to the enemy pool if eliminated. Alright, so that's what the event cards do. They just give you something special that can affect the gameplay in some way. However, the event cards do not have a movement point or levee point. So when you play the card, that's kind of what you're doing for that turn. Alright, so part of your strategy then is deciding, is this the right time to play an event card? So what do we do with cards? Let me pick these up. I'm going to just stick these back in the deck here. Alright, so after you kind of shuffle it up a little bit, what you're going to do for each player is you get 6 cards. I'm just counting out 6 cards here off to the side. So let's say that's for 1 player, and then however you deal them out. Boom. Now, as the player, you're going to look at your hand and you're going to decide which card to discard. So you're left with 5. So remember, the game is played out in 5 years, and then each year has 5 turns. And so this is not only determining what you can do on any given turn, but it's a great way to keep track of how many turns. It's just a very simple way to keep track of all the different steps going on. So I'm going to decide which one to get rid of. So when you think about the anatomy of a card, like the command cards, that's my movement points, that's my levee. So this is only activating 1 unit, but boy, that's got a levee of 3. That's really, really good. This here has like the initiative or move of 2 and only a levee of 2. So if I was going to look at the cards, this 2 is stronger than that 2, because you can do 2 movement points and get 3 levee. So if I was going to discard a command card, it'd probably be this one. Now I also have in my hand 2 event cards. Now I might not like one of these event cards. So let's see, Apollo, Trickster, Sun God grants you the power to copy the card played by your opponent last turn. Use a copied card when determining player 1. Yeah, it's hard to say if I would like that, because this might sit in my hand and I might be thinking, boy, when would be a good time to play that? It's a gamble. It's a gambling card. So maybe you don't feel like gambling. So I'm going to keep that card and I'm going to discard Apollo. Anyway, that's what you would do. Each of you, you and your opponent then would each go through the cards, select the one you want to discard, and now you don't show what you discarded, and of course you don't want to show the opponent your hand. Let's see what our opponent did have. Oh, they were all command cards. Well then, so if I was going to look through command cards, see 4 movement, that's a high mobility type of card, 1 levee. I've got 2 initiative / move points with 2 levee, 3 2. Oh, I got a bunch of 2/2s. I would say I would get rid of this one since I have 2 of those. See, because now if I needed to mobilize a lot of stuff, I've got a 4. It's a high initiative. Good middle of the road one here, 3 with a 2 levee, the same as these. But I'm going to keep this one too, because even though that might be a low like initiative or movement, but again it has a high levee. So I'll just get rid of this one. And again, that would go face down into the discard, and then I have my secret hand that I can now start playing on the game turns. So what do you do then for initiative? So basically then, each person's going to throw a card out. You compare the number. Now, if you play an event card is going to win initiative. Unless both people play an event card. If both players put down an event card, they cancel each other out, and that kind of ends that particular turn. So time advances rather quickly. Otherwise, you're going to look for the number. Now, if there's a tie, Caesar gets to be player 1. Okay, so that's the advantage to playing Caesar. All right, so that's the basics of the card phase. We'll talk a little bit more now about the command phase. Now, each turn that you do is broken down into 3 phases, and we'll look at each phase separately later on. But to start with, the idea is after you play your command card and you determine who has the initiative, you would then have a choice of moving, and then you can do your levies. Now, this is a good way to kind of remember the sequence as well, because your movement's on top and then levies on the bottom. So this too means I could look at 2 cities that I have, or more. I can look at as many cities as I want, but I could then activate 1 city regardless of how many blocks that it has, and then they can move. So I can activate a city for move. And because I've got 2, I could activate essentially 2 cities. And again, we'll go over move details here in a little bit. After movement's done, then you do the levy, which is where I can then recruit, bring in new units, or if I had a unit that was damaged, I could then repair it under certain conditions. All right, so again, we'll cover that as well later. After all movement is done and levies are done, it says battles. Woo! Now they're one at a time, and they're fought in the sequence determined by player 1. So again, that's another good advantage to being player 1. If you get that, is you might be able to kind of change the tide of the map by picking the order in which battles are fought, but that is an advantage. So that's the 3 phases that you have. So remember, it's 5 game years, 5 game turns per year, and then each turn is 3 phases, and it's simple: move, levy, combat. Well, now that we know the phases, then what exactly are we doing, right? We're pushing the blocks around is what we're doing, and having our battles, and this is what we're recruiting. So I thought we would just take a look at the blocks. Now, the major block types that you have, and I'll throw a leader in here as well. They're usually like a name for a specific person. Let me shift that over here. So anyway, here's an example then of a leader block. It'll have the person's name, and each side has 3. So Julius Caesar has 3 leader blocks, and Pompey has 3 leader blocks. And they attack pretty quick. They usually have 3 strength and a decent combat value. Obviously, since they're worth victory points, you don't want to have them in battle too often, but they can participate. Let's see. Then we have, these are the Legion blocks, and they've got the eagle, and this is your most plentiful block in the game. That's what you have the most of. They're usually the strongest blocks. They usually have the most steps, and in a lot of cases they have a better combat value than other types of blocks. Then you have the auxiliary blocks, and auxiliary is made up of 2 infantry and 2 potential archer blocks you can recruit. Now, they vary in strength as far as how many steps they have, but generally they only have 1 attack value, and we'll talk about the firepower here in a moment, but auxiliary blocks are usually kind of your weakest. Then there's the ballista. Generally tends to be pretty strong, doesn't have too much health though, and each side has 1. And then you have your navies, and I think there's like 5 navies per side, but they again allow for amphibious movement. They can attack. They can participate in like land battles because they'll be like at the port providing, bombardment, things like that. Plus the navies can battle at sea. And remember, that's actually a pretty important thing to consider for like Pompeii, because depending on how you move them around the map, you might need your navies. Then finally there's Cleopatra. Cleopatra for the game is not a leader block, but she does bring influence possibly to a battle, because again, it's 4 steps and she attacks at a 1. And I've actually read on a forum, some people were saying, don't think of Cleopatra necessarily as a physical representation of her military, like she's not actually there because it's not a leader block. So this could be, think of it as like political motivation, things like that. Maybe an abstract representation of her power. But anyway, she starts on the side of Pompey, and she can flip either side during battles. So there's Cleopatra. All right, so let's take a look at the strengths. Well, first of all, you have here this number at the top, and it's in Roman numerals, and this gives you a representation of like steps, how much damage they can take, and how many dice they roll in battle. So for example, Octavian here has 3 steps. Each time he takes a point of damage, you rotate the block, and then you know what his current strength is. And then finally a 1, and then after you go past 1, they perish away. Now, this represents how many dice you roll. So again, if Octavian was in combat, he would roll 3 dice. Now, how do you know if you hit? Well, that's what this number right here is, that firepower number. When you roll a dice 6, he would have to hit on a 2 or a 1. So if I rolled my 3 dice, that would be 2 hits, 2 and a 1. Now, when you take a look at a legion, legions generally typically are stronger. They usually have 4 steps, and sometimes you'll see them rated as a 2 or a 3 firepower. So legions are definitely, if you're going to recruit blocks, a lot of people say don't bother recruiting auxiliaries, just go straight for legions first, and then you can get the other stuff later, because they will be your strongest block. So when you compare that to the auxiliary, whether it's archers or the auxiliary infantry, they usually have a firepower of 1. Well, the ballista we said is a 4. Navies typically have about a 2, but as you can see, ballista and the navies only have 2 steps. They're pretty fragile. And then Cleopatra has a 1. Now you'll also see there's a letter. So there's an A, there's a C, there's a B. That's the initiative. So when you're doing a fighting, the A's go first, and then the B's go, and then the C's go. So this is one advantage that the auxiliaries have. Archers go at an A. So they do go first. They could potentially hurt, damage, cause a couple points of steps of damage. It's just that, they only hit on a 1. But they go first. Same with this auxiliary infantry. If you purchase out a 4 block, that's 4 dice you're rolling. And they go before legions. Legions, I have not seen a legion. They're all C. So that's why you have some variety here. Legions might be the staple of the forces, but if you can supplement it with a couple auxiliaries, that's why they're auxiliary, you might be able to soften up your opponent a little bit. All right, and then of course your leaders would always attack first. And Caesar, for example, let's bring Caesar in. Caesar has a firepower of 3. So yeah, you want to keep Caesar safe. However, depending on what you're doing, there's a chance then that he could cause some real damage because he's an A block with 3 strength. Anyway, that's a little bit about the blocks, and we'll cover detail a little bit more, the movement, how you move them, and then we'll also go into detail maybe a little bit more on combat and show you how those values work in action. But for now, that's the basics of the blocks. Alright, so now we'll just do a little tour of the map. So right now I'm in the lower right hand portion of the map. This is where Alexandria is also a 2-point city, and that's where Cleopatra starts, is in Alexandria. So this is northern Africa right here. Then as we go up, there is Syria. Then you're moving up past the Middle East a little bit. There's another city. Alright, C is up here. And we just swing around. Like I said, just a quick little detour. So as far as cities, there are 11 cities, and 2 cities are worth 2 points each, right? So Rome is worth 2 points, Alexandria is worth 2 points. So again, if you're trying to go for 10 victory points, then you would need to gather, let's see, if you owned Alexandria and Rome, you would just need, I'm not good at math, but just a few more cities to get a city victory if you want to go that route. Alright, so there you go. Now, let's look at the map. So the map here then is comprised of your cities. Now, the cities, that's where you have to locate stuff. When you're having your troops, say, move around, they're going to move from city to city. That's how you dictate movement. This, unlike some block games, it's not area movement, it's city to city movement. So if you were going to compare this to another Columbia game, Napoleon comes to mind. So you move from city to city. Then you have your roads, and we'll talk about how the road movement works specifically, but you have major roads, which are solid lines, minor roads, which are dashed. Then you got your Cs. Now Cs are marked off into areas. All right, so those lines then designate the different C areas. And then every city is a port, and then you have some maps which have that big old boat. That's a major port. That's important because that's where you recruit navies, and that's where you can repair navies and whatnot. Now, as far as city control, because that's what we're fighting for, if a city is empty, it's vacant. If it's got somebody in it, it is then under that control. If for some reason it's got 2 in there because they're about to fight, that's now a contested city. And city ownership does change immediately. All right, so that's something to consider. That's important because that might affect abilities to retreat later down the road, so on and so forth. So now there are some straits, which are, there's only four straits on the map, if I remember right. And that's what these blue arrows are. So again, they're separated by sea, and if you didn't have a navy, you could potentially cross here at one of the straits. I'm going to pick this up here, and I'm going to show you that this will allow Pompey to move across the water. So even if he loses his navies, he's still not completely landlocked, but his choices are limited. So you got 2 straits over here, and then down here in the southwest, there's a strait right here. And I thought, yeah, here's another one in the middle of the map. Now, this here island, though, Syracuse, this is still kind of isolated. This isn't going to help Pompey because there's no strait here. He would need a navy to come to Syracuse, but then there's a strait. So possibly, if Rome fought down here, Julius Caesar might put some troops down here to try and keep Syracuse, anyway, as a invasion launch point. Sicily, oh. Almost like maybe that's happened in other times in history. All right, so those are important places to keep in mind. I don't know where I pulled that block from. Oh, here. Syracuse. Well, we'll leave them there if that's where it came from. Perfect. So there you go. That's just some of the basics of the map. Now, there's some islands. Yeah, see, like over here, there are some depictions of little islands. Those aren't playable. But we do have a few islands that are playable. So like Crete is playable because it's got a city and a port. Again, a big island here like Sicily, it's got 3 cities on it, and a major port. All right, so there are a couple islands that are playable. All right, so that's I think that kind of covers the basics of the map. We'll go ahead and start looking at. Then we'll take a look at map setup since we're right here. What I have is the rule book. This is page 4. So it tells you where all your starting troops are going to go. So we've got Caesar, you've got Pompey. It also tells you which should be your leftover parts that go to your levy. That's where you're going to pull your new recruits from. Now you do have your historical deployment, and what's really cool is there's also a free deployment. So if you want to change things up a little bit, it's just optional deployment method. Players deploy blocks as per historical OB, but they can swap any blocks on the map as long as the original number of deployed blocks in each city is maintained. Blocks from friendly levee pool cannot be substituted. All right, so, but that way, if you and your friend are really familiar with the game and you want to spice it up a little bit, yeah, you can try to swap out some units. Now, you also have to maintain your levee pool. Since it's right here, let's take a look at it. Basically, you stand those upright. That way you kind of hide the identity. That's one reason people really like block games, right? It's the fog of war that's built in. But essentially, you expend your levy points to deploy blocks from the pool to the map. Now, except for leaders, blocks that are eliminated during play are returned to the levy pool, but are always placed face up until the current year ends. then the blocks cannot be levied until the next year, right? So that's important to know. If you're having a lot of luck, you're going to recruit a lot of troops, and you can have a lot of stuff placed up on the map, right? You're doing good. Your levee pool is fine. But if you're not doing so good with the dice and you're losing a lot of troops, then your levee pool might fill up with a lot of dead people, essentially, and you have to wait a year before you can draw fresh recruits. So anyway, levee pool is off to the side. Let me show you how I do my levee pool. So right here is the map. And then because I play solo, central to me, I just have my blocks laid out here. You know, I got my auxiliary, I got my elephant. Oh, we didn't talk about the elephant. Since we're talking about different types of units. Yeah, Pompeii can get elephants. Now the elephants, this is actually, I think, a very, very cool unit. Well, for one, strength 4, so that's 4 dice it's rolling, and they hit on 3s. So this is a very powerful unit. And it's a B, so it comes before legions. So this is a very powerful unit. However, it also only has 2 steps for damage. So if it takes a point of damage, it goes from a 4 and it drops to a 2, and then it's gone. So this is very, very much the definition of a glass cannon. So it's going to come into battle strong, but the elephants, they scare easy. They weren't designed for war, even though they're war elephants, but that's a very interesting unit. Anyway, that's just part of my pool. And then what I do over here, as we swing the camera around, that's where I've got my Julius Caesar, my Caesar levy at. So I can just recruit as needed. Alright, so the levee pool is a very important aspect that you need to manage. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about the map, we've talked about some of the counters. We'll go ahead and start talking about the command phase. What do we do with these cards? How do we make these things work? Alright, so here's our good friend from earlier, our command card. It's got 2 movement and 2 levee. So the first thing we're going to do then is worry about movement. So Julius Caesar is player 1. He can pick a city, and then he can decide where he wants to move. Now along these major roads, which are the solid lines, he can move up to 4 units. Now up here in Genoa, he's got 3 troops. So he could move all 3 along that road to Rome. Easy. And that would be 1 move point. Now what I could also do for 1 movement point, since I'm activating the city, I could, for example, move 2 units here and then move 1 unit along that road, major road up there, into this city. And that would be valid too, because again, it's not 1 movement point per troop per se, it's 1 movement point per city that you're going to activate. Now along the dashed roads, it's 2 units. Alright, so if I acted, say, Ravenna, and I wanted to move troops down here to Rome, I could go the long way, which would be to move people along the major road, and then I can move them here. Because with movement, you can move up to 2 cities, as long as you're not attacking. So if I move along the major road here, but again, see, like, I gotta look here, there's dashed lines, so I would still only be able to move 2 units here. So if I was going to do that, I might as well just use 1 movement point to come down here. But you can move up to 2 adjacent cities as long as you're not attacking. Now if the enemy was here, or let's say that they were 2 cities over, right? I could move here, but I can't do my second move into combat. I think there's a card for that specifically that would let you move like 2 city moves and then make your attack. But you can't do that normally in the game. So I could move my units here on the major road, and then next turn I would be able to spend a movement point, and then I could activate, say, just 2 blocks along that minor road and do an attack. Okay, so that's a little bit about movement as far as the land units go. Now stacking, there's no limit to how many people you can put in a city. However, when you get to the winter phase, then you're going to see that cities can only support a certain amount of blocks. So you'd want to be very careful about, because you might say to yourself, I want to do a big attack and send a lot of troops into a city. It's just that after that battle, if you have a lot of troops remaining, that might be bad for the winter turn. But what do you do if there are blocks, enemy blocks in a city? Okay, so the stacking, you could have 30 blocks attack a city with only 2 blocks if you had that. That's fine. But how do we get them there? Well, let's just say Pompey has these 2 units in Rome. He's got Pompey himself, and he's got his first legion with him. Well, for a movement point, I could activate the city of Genoa, and I can move Antonius down. Now, we'll do Caesar. So let's activate Ravenna. Oh, I can only move 2 along that minor road. Well, then let's do this road. So we do Antonius, and he's going to move down to Rome. So I'm just going to lay those down since that's where we're looking at. So I'd move him along, and now he's here. Now, this is the main attack force. So what that means is anybody else who moves into that city to fight for either the attacker or the defender is going to be set up as reserve forces. And we'll explain what reserve forces are when we get to combat. But the city is now contested. See, the thing is, I would not be able to do 2 moves with Julius Caesar here to go to the main road. That's still a dotted line. Let me move this map or these blocks for a second. So if I wanted to then as reserve, I could take Julius Caesar and one of his legions, and now I could go along the dashed line here on the next movement point and bring them down into Rome to fight as well. All right, so that would be reserve. Now, the defender, though, has a chance to move stuff up. So if I had people here in Neapolis, for example, and I know Rome's being attacked, I can move him up here, and now that's a reserve. And what I do is I place my units face down to indicate which ones are reserve, only because that is important. Reserves don't fight in their first round of combat. So that allows you to move some units back and forth, though. And this is the part I struggle with. And as a solo player, not so bad, because I just kind of move stuff around. With a face-to-face opponent, then over time I could see where you're going to learn how to develop strategies, where to set up deployment spots. If your opponent sees that you're putting a whole bunch of troops in a neighboring cities, they might be getting ready to attack. So if I've got, well, that's a port they couldn't attack. But, if I had a couple legions up here, they could cross the dotted line. I've got, 2 blocks here, and then I've got all of these blocks up in Genoa. Then, yeah, I, as the Pompey player, know that there's probably a big battle coming. And I would want to move my troops up into adjacent cities as well, so I could prepare to, set up defenses. Anyway, strategy. That's what I really like about this game as well, is just trying to think how to move stuff. And now the extra layer of movement, though, comes with the Navy units. So let's go ahead and grab a boat. So when the game starts, most of these boats are in ports. Now the rules say that you cannot move this here area here, Mare Tyrnum. This is one big area. Let me see if I can shift and show you the area a little bit better. Let's say your boat starts down here, right? And all the ships start in a port. Now you don't get to move your boat exactly from one port to another. It says you have to move to an adjacent sea first and then to the next port if you want them in port. If they're in port, they can participate in a battle. If they're in a major port that has a boat, they can do a repair, how they spend their levy points, which we'll show later. Or I could leave him in the sea, and then this is now a friendly sea to me, and now would allow for the amphibious movement. So amphibious movements mean that I can now move friendly blocks. Well, that's not a friendly block. I can move friendly blocks then from a port up to another port using this sea because I've got a navy there. But the thing is, the amphibious movements, they come before any other movement in the game. So if I've got a bunch of land movement that I want to do, say back up there, I actually have to do all the amphibious movements first, because your ship, at least one ship, has to remain in that friendly area at the start of the move, and it has to stay there throughout the entire move, because in a way, just think of it, the ships are ferrying people back and forth. So you have to have a ship. If I didn't have a ship here, then I could not do any amphibious movements among these friendly ports. So you want to make sure you have your ship in the friendly area first. Then you can do amphibious movements. Now you can move two troops through amphibious movement, if I remember right. Let's double check that real quick. Oh, okay, yeah, no, they can move as many as you want. It's 1 movement point per block. But the thing is, they can't move from port to port using your ships and then do a land move. So I could not say, for example, go from Utica, do my amphibious move up to Rome, and then from Rome, move over here. So 1 movement point per block to move it up to another port, and then they have to stop moving there. What does limit how many troops you can move, though, is this here, the strait. This is where you get to move 2 units across a strait. So if I'm on this side of the city and I want to move over here, I can move 2 blocks. However, if it's enemy occupied, you can't move there. You'd actually have to bring some navies down or bring down land troops to try and free that city up. So you can't cross a strait. Well, I think you can do 1, so that's not much. You can move 1 unit. That's a boat. You can't move it across a strait. So you can take 1 land unit and move that across a strait. The other thing too is, in addition to, say, if this was like if I had an enemy here, I can move 1 unit for 1 movement point across. If he wasn't there, right, that's 2 units. But here's something. Navies can cross the strait from this sea to this sea, and they don't have to worry about if that's a contested city or not. They just cross through. So they can ignore who owns what city on either side of a strait. Now, the last thing to talk about movement is this concept of pinning. All right, so we know we can move ground troops from city to city. We got a little bit on how to move your navies. But here, let's say we're up here, and I've got a couple of Pompey soldiers here in Rome, Pompey soldiers in Rome, and then I have, say, Julius Caesar, which I move along this major road, and he's now in the city. What happens is he pins an equal amount of defenders, and the defender gets to choose which units are pinned. That means the pinned units can't move, so they could not retreat. If I, say, only brought 1 soldier in to start with, then Pompey would be able to decide which of these is going to be pinned, and then if he wanted, he could retreat out of the city. I mean, that's an important consideration. Again, if you think about your strategy and how the game plays out, that might be worth doing if you had, say, a leader. Let's grab here. Let's say I had, who's that? Scipio. Let's say I had Scipio, and then we've got the 5th Legion here, and we've got, maybe there's another legion. Okay, we got a couple legions. We got Scipio, and Julius Caesar comes in. Where's Caesar? Caesar comes in and brings one of his legions. He's feeling brave. Now, normally you would say, why would you do that? Because strength-wise, the defender has the advantage. But let's say there's been some fighting. Scipio and his legions are weak. They are at a severe disadvantage. So Caesar takes advantage of the situation, moves down some troops, pins these guys. Pompey says, well, we'll pin those. And now that would give Scipio a chance to retreat. So that's just probably one of the I think people probably overlook the importance of pinning sometimes. And again, as a solo player, I don't really think about it too much. It just kind of, what would make sense to me. But I think that might be a tactic that some people kind of overlook. But I see it as a very important aspect of the game. So when it comes to movement, right, you've got your land troops essentially moving from city to city using the roads, major roads, minor roads. They can cross the strait 2 units at a time, or cross 1 unit into a contested enemy city. Once you move troops into an enemy occupied city, you can pin them there. All right, so those are some of the basic concepts of movement in addition to your navies. Well, let's take a look at combat. We've looked at a lot of stuff, but the big thing here is fighting. How do these guys fight? So I'm going to set up some blocks, and we'll do an imaginary combat. All right, I've set up kind of a imaginary situation that could happen here. I say imaginary because I just kind of made it up here. But essentially, let's say each player is going to have a couple of move segments and levee. We haven't covered levee in detail, which is recruiting, but we'll discuss that briefly here because it's part of your card. So again, if I grab a friendly command card, right, I got 2 movements, 2 levee. So first, we're going to start with, let's say, Julius Caesar here. So he would do, for 1 movement point, he's going to activate this city and move all these guys along here for his major road. So he pops in here. Now what we have are 2 defending legions and a navy. Now the navy is in port, and so I would think that I brought 3 legions. Since these guys are in port, they would be pinned. All 3 of these are pinned, so they're not going to be able to move. Now, I have 1 more movement point based on my command card. So what I would do is now move my, move my lesser troop here. And I would say they're going to take this main road. Now remember, because they're going to be reserve, I'm just going to place them upside down to remind myself that they came into the battle as a reserve. Then I would do the levee. Now levee is that part where you can recruit new units, or if you have a wounded unit, you would be able to say, take this wounded unit, spend 1 levee point to bring it up 1 point. Now as far as recruiting things, there are some rules to that, and I won't read every single rule, but they are in the book. So for example, if you bought a new unit, let's say you're buying a whole new legion, this is important. This is why ownership of cities is important and why levee is done after movement. I can't just recruit brand new people and put them in a city. So like if we've got Pompey as a defender, he can't say, oh, I'm going to raise an army and stick it in this contested city. Most of the time your recruits are going to have to be drawn and placed in friendly cities, and sometimes, depending on the unit, vacated cities. Some units, like if you buy horses and auxiliary, they're going to show up in that city as long as it's not contested. It says here they deploy in their named city, which must be friendly. Otherwise, if I've got Julius Caesar in Antioch, Pompey couldn't recruit horses, for example. Leaders, they're going to deploy to a friendly city. Legions deploy in their named city, has to be friendly. All right, so again, not to go over every single situation, but that's important to combat. Once you start moving troops into cities, you're going to lock them down. They can't buy any reinforcements. That's why the reserve move for your opponent is important. So let's say Caesar did his 2 moves and he did his levee elsewhere on the map. Because see, Caesar then couldn't go, oh, well, hey, since I'm fighting, let me go ahead and repair a couple of these battered units that I brought into battle. You want to make sure all your levies, all the units you bring into combat are, maybe replenished before you move them the next year. It's just, again, you got to really think the long game sometimes. When you're first starting out the game and nobody's done any combat, it's no big deal. But once you start taking losses, you want to think about that. Like, okay, I can't move them into battle this turn. I'm going to have to delay so I can levee and build them up. But then that might be the time that your opponent launches an attack. All right, so all this timing is very important. But let's say the levies are done, the movements are done. Well, Pompey had to move something. Well, since Pompey can't recruit units to that city, he did have a unit down here. So again, he's going to use a movement point, activate this guy, and boop, move somebody up. And he gets that person moved into the reserve. All right, just shifted the camera to see this better. Now, one thing though, as the defender, you do get what's called a response move. So instead of just activating 1 city, it says you spend up to 2 movement points. So theoretically, as a defender, if you had a lot of adjacent cities, you could bring a lot of troops to the defense. This is another important aspect of the game then. It's kind of that push your luck. You've got to really think, am I bringing enough troops to the battle to potentially compensate for the defensive firepower that my opponent can bring? that, you know, if you can find cities that are isolated and don't have a lot of backups, then your attacks will be that much more successful. So again, the game is just layered with depth and a lot of things to keep in mind when you're playing. All right, so not trying to scare people off, I'm just trying to let you know it's not just a simple game of move some stuff here. There's a lot of think ahead. How do I think my opponent can respond to that? But we've done it now. Our troops are in the city. We are now going to be fighting for Utica, down here in the south. So I've got my troops laid out. I'm going to set them like this so you can see them. I won't show the reserve units yet. I do have here 2 of Pompey's legions. I have the Navy because he was in port, and then I got his reserve unit face down. All right, so the way that the turn works, there's going to be 4 battle turns. The defender attacks first, and then the attacker gets to attack. On the 4th turn, if the defender hasn't defeated all the enemy blocks, the 4th turn, the attacker has to retreat. Now, you can retreat on turn 2 and turn 3, and then on turn 4, the attacker has to retreat. That means the defender gets a free attack. That's almost like pursuit of, you know, his troops are chasing down stragglers of the enemy. All right. Now, how do you fight? What you do is, let me get my pointer here, is we're going to take, first of all, take a look at initiative. So I have an A unit in my leader here of Caesar, and there are no A's over here on the enemy side. So normally defender would go first, but since there's no enemies with an A, Caesar would go first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can just bring the dice tray over and set it there and hopefully not mess things up. But Caesar has 3 dice, and he has a strength of 3. So I'm going to roll 3 dice and see if we hit on 3s. Oh, good. So we got 2, 1, and a 2. So that's actually 3 hits for Caesar. All right. So there you go. That's the basics right there. Once your hits have been determined based on the roll, I then have to assign damage over here. And assigning damage is pretty easy. You just take a look at your highest strength unit, and that gets reduced first. If you have a tie, like I got these 2 legions, the defender gets to decide which, you know, unit takes the first hit, you know, among the tie. So we did 3 hits, so I got to reduce that one by 1. I'm going to reduce this by 1 because that's now the highest. Then, since all of these have a 2, I have 1 more hit to assign. I'm going to put it on the Navy, only because the Navy has the lower initiative, and he's not going to get to fight right away anyway. All right, so that's the A's. Then you would check to see if there are B's. Now we did see, like, you know, the elephant is a B, for example. Ballista, they're a B. Now with Ballista, their first shot is a B4, and then after their first shot, when they're defend, let's see here, there was a rule just specifically for Ballista. It says for Ballista, well, of course I can't find the rule for Ballista now. It's on this other page. Defender, attacker, there's retreats, regroups, navies, navy retreats. Now I just got done looking at this too. Oh, yeah, Ballista. Ballista fights at a B4 when defending. Oh, but a D4 when attack. Okay, good. So if I had this B in here, that would be the next unit to resolve, but it wasn't here in the city. All right, so then I got to look at the C's. All right, now I have a whole bunch of C's, and they have some C's. The defender goes first. So we would do the same thing at this point, right? I'm going to go 2 dice for that one, 2 dice for that one. And since they have the same strength, what I do is I'm just going to roll all 4 of those together. So that'd be 4 dice total, hitting on 2s. The rules don't say to do that. I think I just have learned that from other games. But that scores 1 hit. So 6, 6, 5, and then a 2. So those weakened units then, that's kind of rough. So I'm going to apply 1 point to this legion. All right, now the attacker gets to go. So again, well, see, they have a 3. So I'm going to roll them separately. Oh, you know what? So I would take that point of damage off of this weaker legion. Ooh, we don't want to. I want to keep that 3 as live as long as possible. So he'll roll 3 dice and he hits on 3 2s and 1s. That's 2 hits. So again, I have to apply to the highest blocks first. So we go 1 hit, 1 hit. Then, since they did take a point of damage, they only have 2 dice to roll, and they hit on 2s and 1s. Oh my goodness, that's 2 more hits. Woo! So I'm going to get rid of the Navy, and I'm going to get rid of this guy. That's worked out very, very well for the attackers. So Caesar just came down in there with his legions and pretty much wiped that out. I would say the only other thing that I was almost got to talk to you about disruption. Basically what happens is, if for some reason during that first round of combat, if I eliminated all of these and all I had left were the reserve units, what would happen is this would become disrupted and it would automatically suffer. Oh great, I brought the leader down as a reinforcement. Okay, that's probably a poor example, but let's say I had this legion here that I brought as a reinforcement. It would automatically suffer 1 step loss, and then when the next round of battle starts, this is the important thing. If you eliminate that main body that was there first, then the tides of battle have changed. The initiative has shifted, which means the attacker now becomes the defender, and the person who was the defender is now the attacker. That's important because remember, defenders attack first. That means the attacker came in and with a decisive blow seized the initiative of battle. And that would mean on the 4th round of combat, if the defender lasted that long, they would have to retreat, right? Who used to be the defender is now the attacker, so they would have to retreat. So Pompey owned Utica at the start, but my goodness, with the way that I rolled, there was a good chance that if he had died, then this reserve unit would have taken a point of damage. Then, when the next battle turn started, he would now be the attacker. All of these reserve troops would now be involved in the battle, and they would all get to resolve their attacks first because they're now the defender of the city. And then I think that would pretty much wipe this guy out because Caesar would go first. Now that he's defending, Caesar would get to roll. So that's almost like 2 attacks back to back. So Caesar would roll his 3 dice. Boom. Oh, yeah, there's his 1 hit. Oh, it only did 1 hit. So that reserve block is still alive. I would check for Bs. There are no Bs. We would do the Cs. But defenders go first. Look at there. I've got 2 legions of strength 3 that hit on 3s. I only brought 4 dice with me. So we'll just do 1 unit at a time. We'd say that one would go. Oh boy. And they hit on 3s and a 1. So that would wipe this unit out. So that actually was not the example I wanted to show you, but that actually worked out very, very well. So if you bring enough firepower and in the first round can wipe out the main body defending that location, then you change the tide of battle. The attacker now becomes a defender and has a very strong chance of kicking out the people that were first there in the city. But now if you win the battle, if the attacker wins the battle, let's say that they didn't change the side and they had to just go through the whole combat normally. When the battle ends, the victor may regroup. Okay, so we finished the battle. This only went 2 battle turns. When you regroup, you can now do move troops to an adjacent city, as long as it's not enemy controlled. Like I couldn't move, say, down here to start another fight, but I could move a couple of troops here following road limits out to try and maybe reinforce on my gains. All right, so you can regroup. There's also rules in here about what you have to do with eliminated blocks. Usually, most troops will go back to the Levee Pool. Leaders are dead. Cleopatra, if she dies in battle, like if Pompey brings her up and she dies, what's interesting is that she will automatically join the other side at strength 1. So, you knock her down and she's fighting for Pompey. Well, now she's going to join the reserve of the other guy. She changes sides at strength 1. So she can actually flip back and forth between opponents multiple times in a combat. It's kind of a weird concept, but it can happen. So a couple folks on Board Game Geek, what they said was, don't think about Cleopatra as an actual fighting unit. Think about Cleopatra as like her political influence. So basically, even though she might be going back and forth, remember, it's not really her. That's not a leader unit. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. It's an extra dice roll for you, So if you keep her alive, she's contributing to the battle in her own special way. All right, now that's the basics of combat. You can retreat from there. There's rules for how to retreat from battle if things are going bad. Unfortunately, because we had such good dice rolls, if I originally put that unit back and I had all these guys now from the reserves forward, I had like 5 blocks here to one weak guy who is taking some damage. He could retreat. He could spend his turn retreating. But remember, because we made him... Well, technically, we cheated and removed a block. I think it was a Navy. We had a Navy block here. We just simply removed a block to demonstrate what would happen for disruption. But theoretically, if I had these 2 blocks here, you could initiate a retreat. But remember, defender fires first. And since if we hadn't cheated and made that a disrupted unit, they would not have flipped initiative, so they would still be the attacker. They would still technically be the defender. So he could technically retreat out of the city first if he wanted to, and he actually would not get attacked because he would be gone. Now, if we reverse that roll, and again, just kind of a basic concept of retreat, the defender would fire first. So let's say these rolls were reversed, and I had a whole bunch of Pompey units here. They were the original defenders of the city. And let's say combat didn't go so good for me, and I've got a couple wounded legions over here for Julius Caesar. So it's a new round of combat. The defenders would all get to roll dice for parting shots, and then if these guys survive, then they could retreat. So again, keeping track of who's attacker, who's defender, keeping track of disruption to see if that initiative shifts, that is important because that can affect your retreat segment. All right. So again, just another cool thought on that. All right, let's go ahead and pretend that everything's done. We've done our movement. We've levied new troops to different parts of the map. We've conducted our combat. You do 1 combat at a time. If I had like 3 combats, I would do all 3 combats. And now that's all done. What we would then have to do is take our... Well, if this was the end of that phase, right? Because the third thing is combat. After all combat's done, we would actually... Remember, we got 5 cards. Oh my gosh, it's taking a long time to explain 1 turn. This was 1 turn. Remember, I got 5 game turns in a year. All them cards. So let's say I went through my cards, right? That was 1 turn. Here's turn 2, turn 3, turn 4 is done, and now turn 5 is done, right? We've now finished up the last phase of turn 5. Now we would get to run a winter turn. All right, so the winter turn is the last thing to do. Once all 5 cards have been played, and before you start the next year, you're going to do the winter. All right, so we'll just kind of look at this together in the rule book. There's not a whole lot of fun map stuff to show you. Stuff happens on the map, but we'll just kind of look at here. First of all, Cleopatra goes home. If Alexandria, because she lives on Alexandria, we'll look at the map. It says here, if Alexandria is enemy occupied, she joins that side immediately at her current strength. So if she survived the entire campaign year at strength 3 and she returns home, she'll stay at strength 3 at that point. And then like if it originally starts as Pompey, so if she goes back and we got a block from Julius Caesar there, then boom. She's now with Julius Caesar. Then, after Cleopatra goes home, we would check for victory. And remember, we're checking to see how many cities we control, victory point wise, and possibly how many leaders we've killed. And we're looking for 10 victory points. Then it says, move all navies to a friendly port on the same sea. Caesar moves first. Navies unable to move to a friendly port are disbanded. They can be rebuilt later, so you'd have to stick them in your levee. So I guess I could show you. So for example, if I've got, this guy sitting out here, here's a friendly port because I've got, that guy there, so he can go there. But yeah, if for some reason I was in an area that was completely surrounded, well, here's the thing. It says friendly. Remember, if there's nothing there that's a vacant, that doesn't count as friendly. It says it has to move to a friendly port. So luckily, I've got a friendly port here. But if I had, say, 2 enemy ports and the rest of these are all vacant, that's not friendly. So he would have to disband. We'd have to rebuild him. But we'll say, luckily, there's 1 friendly port, so he runs into port. And remember, any city on the coast is a port, and then you have major ports. All right, then you do the winter supply. Now this is why after a battle, especially when you come near the end of your 5th turn, you might want to think about moving some blocks out of a city. I just put a stack here because cities can only support a certain amount of people. So it says right here, all cities can supply a maximum of 3 blocks without penalty. The limit is increased by the city value. So for example, Neapolis can handle 3 folks, no problem. If the turn ended and we had just finished combat and I had 4 units there and I didn't regroup, then I would lose somebody. Now, you increase that limit if it's a major city. So if it has like a 1, then Syracuse can support 4 blocks. Rome, for example, could support 5 blocks. All right, so that's an important thing. You want to make sure that as the game year starts to come to a close, you might want to think about moving your troops in such a fashion that you won't have to worry about supply. But again, it just goes back to the depth of the game. You want to bring lots and lots of troops to conduct battle because if the dice don't like you, you're going to lose a lot of troops. If the dice love you, you're going to decimate the enemy, but now you've got like 7 blocks in a city and you've got to get them out of there, otherwise winter will take them out. Then there's disbanding. So you can't merge blocks together, but you can disband a block. Like, what does that mean? Well, you can't take like 2 wounded blocks and put them together. Like if winter was coming and you had more blocks than necessary, right? I couldn't like just take 2, stick them together to make a 4 block. You can't mix legions and things like that. So again, you just got to think about, if I had a city that was overstacked, I might want to get rid of the weak one because I can't merge it into another one. All right. So that's just some thoughts there as well. And then finally, the year reset. Once you get past that part, right, you checked your victory, you got your navies to port, you fed your troops, then you reset the year. All face-up blocks in Levee Pool stand up because remember when you kill troops, they go back in face up, so you know not to buy them again, but now you can stand them upright. They're available for purchase. Then you can shuffle all the cards again. Okay, so we grab up all the cards that we've been playing and keeping track of our game turns. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Yay. And you're ready for a new turn. Alright, so just some parting thoughts then on the game, what I think about it. It's pretty easy to learn. Probably just in the explaining of mechanics, I probably took more time to explain concepts than it does to actually learn them and play the game. once you have this down, like most games, then it plays much quicker, right? When both people know what you're doing. But where's the challenge then? So again, as we were explaining in some of the examples, the challenge comes from deciding what you need to do to win. Where am I going to put those troops to, prepare for an attack? That's probably the problem I have the most as a single player is, since it's just me, I know exactly where all the troops are. I know exactly, what cities I want to try and take, and I try to play fair, and I try to think, well, what would my opponent do? He would want to try and bring in reinforcements as well. So can you play this game solo? Yeah, you can. But I think it's a little more difficult for me because I tend to get biased. I think when I play a lot of times, I kind of pick maybe who I want to win a little bit, but it's not even that way the whole game. Generally, I'll kind of look at the map situation and I'll say, oh, narratively what might be fun is if I set it up to where, this type of battle happens, or I'm recruiting elephants because I want to bring elephants into the battle. So I think that a lot of times when I play, it's just more fun than, like a competitive, obviously, because it's just me. But with a face-to-face opponent, this game, I'm going to say, would probably really, really shine. And sadly, I have to say that it probably would because I haven't played this with a face-to-face opponent. This has just been all solo. I've actually been trying to get the game learned a little bit so I can get my son to play. He isn't so much into the wargaming as much as I am, simply because this doesn't make sounds and, it's not a video game, essentially. But I'm hoping maybe I can get him to play. So learning the game wasn't terribly difficult. Again, it's 8 pages. I think for me, it's just like any game, obviously, the more you play it, the more you'll remember some of the little rules about how many troops can move across the strait. But what I'll say, though, about the rules is the rulebook is written really well. You can go to the Columbia Games website, you can download the rulebook yourself, and what's nice is every question that I have is actually answered in the rule book. Even going to the forums, you'll see a lot of times if someone asks a question, there's generally an answer for it in the rule book. I'm not going to say that there are situations that might come up that aren't answered, but a lot of times if you just kind of think it through, or if you are playing face-to-face, if you and your opponent kind of agree on something, then you could probably come to a pretty good understanding of how the rules should be played out. But essentially, it's not a difficult game. And I would say if you were looking for an introductory war game, maybe to introduce somebody to, this would not be a bad choice. I think that with the way you have the cards to help you keep track of your battle rounds, so there's 5 years, there's 5 turns, so the cards do a fantastic job of helping you keep track of where you are in the game. The blocks, there's not a whole lot of data, so again, you have your strength, your combat rating. But what's nice is with the initiative, there's a lot of I'm going to say there's some depth to it. So it's not just simply I have a certain amount of blocks and I look at their combat strength and roll dice. There's some planning. Do I want to buy some of those auxiliary units that shoot first? They attack on A's and B's, but they only hit on 1s. So there's actually quite a bit of thought here. So the game is as complex as you make it to be. So you can just play it, only recruit legions if you want, and that would simplify the game quite a bit. But as you get familiar with the game and your strategies start to form, then there's a lot here to open it up. Like, oh, I will buy elephants. I will buy some horse people, because they give me some tactical advantages. So I would say overall, this is a very good addition to your game library. Now, if I was going to nitpick, so yes, Columbia Games, they sent me this game so I could do a review and show you components. But I don't think it'd be very fair then if I didn't point out some things that I think could be improved upon. I would like to see the cards fit my card sleeve better. Okay, is that nitpicky? Is that a really fair criticism? No, because I'm sure you can buy smaller card sleeves. That's just what I had. You know, honestly, there's nothing really mechanically wrong with the game. Again, because you've got variations in the types of blocks. It's not like all the blocks are a carbon copy of one another. The map, would I like to see a map board, a hard-mounted map? That'd be great, but then your costs go up, right? So, you know, there's a balance act between game components and the cost of the game. But and then again, that's all going to be from the perspective of the person playing. But as far as game breaking things, so far as a solo player, I haven't really found anything that breaks the game or makes it unplayable. Maybe if I started getting into the face-to-face, I might find some criticisms with it, but currently I don't really have anything at fault. I will say though, if you're a solo player, I'm going to share with you how I do at least the cards and setting up the game for solo play. So let me show you that real quick. Alright, last thing to show you before I go is how I do the cards for solo play. Now what I do is I will just shuffle the deck. Then I discard the first 2 cards. Because remember, when you play the game, you deal 6 cards to each player, and then you have to discard 2 cards, right? So I won't even look to see what these are. So I set those aside. That's what makes your deck slightly different every time you play, because you don't know which cards are getting dropped. Then what I'll do is I just simply say, like, the first card is for Julius Caesar, and then the second card will be for Pompey. So you draw Caesar, then you draw Pompey. Then I would just go and Caesar drew a 3, but Pompey played an event, so Pompey would go first, and he would do his thing. But right there, I would know that when it comes around to Julius Caesar, he's got 3, and he's got a levee. Now, if for some reason the card's not valid because you couldn't play an event right away or whatever the case may be, if it's an invalid draw, then what I would do is just put those cards back and try again. But even if I did draw, say, 2 events, for example, that would stand because that's valid. And then same thing here. If I was playing face-to-face, then this would have been the turn I decided to play 1, but I really wanted 3 levies. Now, that might lead to, on occasion when I play, where it doesn't fit what I wanted to do at the moment. But again, since I'm a solo player and I have complete view of the map, this kind of helps me not have complete control over both sides. So even though I might be favoring one player over the other at a particular moment, the cards then being a blind draw kind of give me some randomness to the game a little bit. Kind of helps manage the fact that I can see and control everything. But anyway, that's my last little tip there for you if you want to play this game as a solo player. And I think I tried to keep this simple in a lot of aspects, but I'm pretty sure that this was long and maybe long-winded. And I appreciate anybody who stuck around. If you're a veteran player, maybe you have some other tips for playing. If you're new to the game and you're interested in this, maybe leave some comments if you have questions, and we'll see if someone in the comments can answer that for you. Otherwise, thanks so much for hanging out and watching the video, and we'll see you next time. Bye.